Crime scene evidence collection. So we'll start out with some general things. When we are collecting evidence, there are steps we take with each item. We start with documentation. The documentation will include our notes, our photographs, and our sketch. So we'll take measurements, and then we'll go ahead and collect. As far as evidence, there's certain ways to mark evidence. Generally, we mark the package the evidence goes into. There can be exceptions, and you always follow your department's policy regardless. Evidence labeling, we're going to see how we label our packaging. We'll do a little demonstration on that. Evidence number, these items all get a number, a unique number. So if the gun is number 1 in your photograph with the little placard, it's going to be number 1 in your notes as evidence. It's going to be number 1 on the property sheet. It's going to be number 1 on all the packaging. And it'll stay that way for the entire case. And then evidence description, we always describe the item in our packaging as well as on our property report. Why do we need packaging? Evidence packaging protects personnel from possible hazards associated with evidence. So once you put the item in a package, the correct type of packaging, it should protect us from accidental firearms discharge, to secure it in such a way to protect anyone who handles that item. Biohazards, we may be dealing with DNA or blood stain or semen or some other biological fluid or something else, some chemical or poison or something. And those things we need to protect ourselves and others from, so we have to package them properly. Sharp objects, there are ways to protect ourselves as we package those. And health hazards associated with exposure to mold. This can be wet plant material, especially marijuana. When it's wet and it molds, you then have mold spores that can be inhaled and can cause some problems to you. So this would protect you as you're collecting these types of evidence, and it protects the people who then handle those packages later, like the people in the property room and the lab. Evidence packaging protects us from possible hazards. Also, it protects evidence against loss. Once it's in a package, it's more difficult to lose what's in the package than if you'd had it just loose somehow. It can protect the evidence against contamination from other sources. It can also protect against cross transfer. So we always have a concern that the DNA or trace evidence on one item of evidence could be transferred to another if we don't handle it properly. So by packaging each item, it eliminates the possibility of cross transfer, either suspect to victim type evidence, victim to suspect, scene to scene, item to item. And also packaging will protect against deterioration of your evidence. It correctly identifies evidence with respect to what is this evidence. The description is on our packaging, and so we can just look at the package and know what is in it. It also can tell us what the original evidence source is. Where was this collected? That'll be on the package. What agency packaged this item? Chain of custody. Chain of custody can be delineated on the package. That's kind of the old school way we would sometimes do it. But in most cases now it's done with barcoding. But again, the packaging will have the barcode on it. Also, it provides a unique identifier, so it cannot be confused with any other evidence item. That's the item number. And then the case number and item number are on the package, so it's easy for us to identify the item, keep track of it, and so forth. What kinds of additional advantages there are? Well, we can note on our packaging what kind of processing is needed. For example, we can put on the package fingerprint processing required. So we package something that later needs to be dusted for prints. We can make that obvious with a notation on there. Health hazards can also be specified on the package. Sharp knife. We also can use biohazard stickers. And that way, once again, someone handling the package after us will know that there are some cautions they need to take. And then also required or preferred storage conditions. Store at room temperature, store frozen. We can put those notations on as well. Before we put something in a package, decide, do we need to do something with our evidence to prepare it for packaging? One example would be wet biological samples like blood stain or fresh plant material that need to be dried. So what can happen if your evidence is wet and you package it? Well, here's an example. This happens to be a saliva reference sample, and it shows that someone put it in this packaging while it was wet. And so the evidence can leak through the exterior of the container. Well, when you have that happen, you can have sample deterioration. You can lose part of your sample, obviously, and the sample can now get contaminated from the outside. So we need to make sure our objects that we package are dry. Now, I'm not talking about fluids. Sometimes we'll collect a fluid and then it needs to stay a fluid. But when we're talking about something that is saturated and the sample that we need is actually the dried result, then we need to dry it and package it properly. When we are packaging, one of the things we need to do is decide what kind of package do we put this particular evidence into. So what kind of packaging may be optimal? Well, maybe plastic. And then if it is plastic, what kind of plastics? Do we need an envelope? Do we need a bag? What exactly? Paper. Do we need an envelope? Do we need a bag? Do we need a box? And then there are other containers that I will show you here in just a moment on the slides. So we have to make a choice. Let me, first of all, just jump right into this and say, most of what we package is packaged in paper products. It's probably easier to say what you don't put into paper products. So as far as a plastic bag, something of that nature, typically what we'll put in plastic are drugs, because drugs can be hazardous to us if we inhale them or touch them. So plastic is a good place to put those. And then questioned documents. So let's say we have a ransom note. Well, we want to get fingerprints off of it. We may need to get DNA off of it, but people need to handle it, to look at it, to make copies of it on a Xerox machine, whatever. So putting it in a plastic sheet is a good way to preserve that until we have the fingerprints done. Sometimes we'll use paint cans to put arson materials in so that the accelerant that may be in the arson materials, let's say you have an arson, you find the point of origin, and so you scoop up some of the material there and you put it into an airtight can. And typically we use paint cans, or you could use some special plastic containers that are more like a bag that have a seal to them. Typically, everything else is going to be going into paper. And the reason for that is paper breathes. So you can have a little bit of air circulation. And if something is not perfectly dry, it can dry. As far as the different types of packaging, here's some examples on the screen. We have a lot of paper bags and envelopes. Here are some plastic bags, some containers to put liquids in. And those little things over on the side, you might see there are pipettes. These are some little cardboard boxes. We have some larger boxes here. This would be a sharps container. These are paint cans to put arson materials in. The cardboard boxes, a gun box. You might be able to see it's got little perforated holes. They're not completely punched out. You punch them the rest of the way out. And then you use strip ties to tie down your firearm in the package. The gun box, the rifle boxes are longer, but are very similar, as well as ones designed for knives. And then we have other boxes here. And this is a box that you can actually put your swabs in if you put them in with the entire stick. Sharps, such as knives, syringes with needles. Then they have some with styrofoam in the end. If you have a knife like this, you could use a knife box and then just secure it as you would a firearm. Bottles to collect liquids. I prefer glass. You should get the type that have Teflon coated threads. That just will make sure you don't get leaky bottles. Pipettes to pick up liquids. So if we are going to use plastic, or one reason would be to package controlled substances. Here is what we typically will use. It's an envelope and it has a slit in the side. It's sealed on 3 sides, and you slide that item in there, and then you use an impulse sealer or a heat sealer of some sort to seal that plastic shut. So what we probably have here is some stickers or stamps that have LSD on them. So sliding that in there and sealing it. Now, K-Pack, it's a brand name. There are other companies that make it, they call it something else. And if you're in the field and you need to seal it, you can have one of these little portable heat sealers or an impulse sealer. Now, I will say another time that I've seen plastic used a lot is in electronic evidence. So cell phones, computers. So that's plastic. Sometimes paper is best. Most of the time it is. An example would be biological samples. Because it's paper and it can breathe a bit, it allows a sample that's not completely dry to finish drying. Also, the size of our package or container is important. If the package is too small, the packaging is likely to fail over time. So you put something in and it's very tight and it starts, you start moving it from here to there and on, the package can rupture. If the package is too big, the evidence can be dispersed throughout the container and be difficult to recover. Again, talking generally about evidence, does the evidence require some internal packaging? Okay, we've decided this needs to go into a cardboard box or it needs to go into a paper bag. But what do we need, if anything, before it goes in? Well, we may need to put the sample into a bindle, because if we didn't, it would be very hard for the lab to get the evidence out of the paper bag. There's all those folds and glued pieces of paper in the bottom part and corners of envelopes that are a little bit open. And that evidence, if you just put a powder in a paper bag or an envelope, it can go everywhere. And so it's very difficult for the lab to open that up and get all of the sample. They probably wouldn't get all of the sample, but in a bindle, they can. Do we need to put the item in a small box and then put it into a larger container? Because sometimes a small box can kind of get lost or hard to sort through all your evidence to find. So putting that small box into a larger container like an envelope or a bag might be better. Coin envelopes, hold down devices, sharps container. Here's an example of what I was talking about with the bindle. Here, if someone put small pieces of glass just into a commercial made envelope, it can fall out the corners, because not always are the corners of the envelope sealed properly. So we want, in something like this, to have a bindle. Again, talking generally about evidence, let's talk about how we seal the evidence once we've packaged it. We have to decide what kind of seal are we going to use. Typically, we use the red evidence tape. The need for an identifying mark. We have to mark on the seal our initials and the date to show that we sealed it. And then where the seal is to be placed, I'll show you some slides next. Now, how can you seal things? We can use a heat seal if it's a plastic K-Pack type container. We can use a tape seal, which we'll typically use on envelopes, paper bags, and boxes. And then there are lock seals. Now, a lock seal, typically where you see that is in plastic containers, plastic bags, or the type they use for arson materials. It has the seal built into it, and it's devised so that when you close it, it's locked and you cannot open it up. You have to cut the bag to get it open. Now, all seals must be initialed. That's going back to the identifying mark to document the person sealing the evidence and dated to indicate when the evidence was sealed. So here we have this red tamper-resistant tape that goes all the way across the flap opening and secures it to the rest of the envelope, and actually is long enough that it actually wraps around slightly on the other side. And you want to make sure it's up close enough to the top where you don't have a big gap there as well. And the same goes for a paper bag. I like to fold them over just a short distance so that there's less chance of anything getting in or out on the edges. And if I need to, I'll put some tape there as well. The knife box is a cardboard box. It's, in this case, there's blood stain on the knife. So you don't want to put it in a plastic bag. Not that you would ever put a knife in a plastic bag. That'd be dangerous. The cardboard box allows some air circulation, and then we have it tied down with a strip tie. Now what I want to do is actually demonstrate packaging an item. I have this water bottle that is evidence. I'm going to go ahead and first fill out the property report. This is the property report form. Put in the case number, the crime code. Let's say it's a burglary and you're in California. That'd be 459 PC. And then the crime classification is burglary. Now notice I'm using ink. We want to do our reports in ink. Then the page number is the page number in the report. So you would leave that blank for now. That gets numbered later when you put in your report together. Date and time property received. Then the address from where the property was received. That's the crime scene in this case. We're ready to record our evidence. So we have an item number. So let's say this is the very first item of evidence that we find. So it's item number 1. So that's where we put item number 1 right here. And now we put a description of the item. You want to be as descriptive as possible. Plastic water bottle. Fiji, 11.15 ounces with cap, because it has a cap on it. So we have the label on the package. The label is going to have the case number. It's going to have the date and the time. The item number, it's item number 1. The description of the item, Fiji, plastic water bottle. With cap. Location where collected. And we're going to put kitchen counter at sink. And then I collected it, so here I go. My name and my ID number. So now we're all ready to collect the item. Up to this point, I've been doing all this paperwork and I'm ready to collect. So what I need to do is now put on fresh gloves. So we do that every item of evidence. We go through a lot of gloves at our crime scenes. All right, so now I have my gloves on. Open the bag. So I have the bag open. Now I can collect the item of evidence. Now let's talk about collecting this water bottle. What kinds of evidence might we have? We can have fingerprints. There also could be DNA on the rim of the bottle. Yes, the cap is on here, but the bottle is empty. And then there could be DNA definitely on the scored edge of the cap, because your skin cells will rub off as you're turning the cap. So we've got all of that. So what do I do to get this item into the bag? Well, I want to touch it where it's least likely to have fingerprints or DNA. I think what I'm going to do is collect it by the cap. The cap will not have usable fingerprints on it. You're just not going to get fingerprints off that textured edge. You can still get DNA. So I'm just going to be careful. I'm just going to grab it from the edges and get it right into the bag. So now we have the item in the bag. Now we need to seal the bag. We want to fold over just the top for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want to crowd the evidence. And number two, we don't want too much space between our seal and the top of the fold. I'm just going to fold this over now a short distance here, like so. And now I need to seal this package. So the way I'm going to seal it is I'm going to turn it back over this way. And I'm going to take that piece of tape. And so it should be a little bit longer than the width of the bag. And if you have one of these, all you do is tear it off, real high tech. Now, the nice thing about this evidence tape is it's scored on the back. So you can peel off one part of it, almost half, and position it on the bag. Now, I need to turn around this way because I really can't see what I'm doing. So I'm going to put I put the tape on like this, so it's on the flap. And now I can pull the other section off. There we go. So now I have exposed the rest of the tape. I just fold this down and I'm going to wrap it around the edges. All right. So this covers that seal and it wraps around the edges, and that you don't have a great deal of space here. And you notice here it's folded around this side. Now we have one more thing we have to do, and that is to initial and date the seal. I have a Sharpie. Sharpies work the best on this kind of material. I'm going to put my initials here. Now watch how I do this. It actually goes from the paper onto the tape. And then I also need to put the date. So that's 3/28/22. And you notice I've gone across the tape as well.